Hi there and welcome to the 1014 Rugby, the global rugby community, and we're bringing you rugby based on passion, integrity and respect. And today we've got former Irish captain, Lions legend, inaugural player of the year and all-round hero, Keith Wood. Welcome, Keith.
World Player of the Year.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you very much for standing up for you. That's very good. I like it. Yeah.
Welcome, Keith. We're really honoured to have you for interviewing the 1014 and have a good old rugby chat. Big one for me. I grew up on the same age as Keith, and though I would have played against you, Keith, back in the day at club rugby and things like that, you were a massive hero for me, and I particularly watched rugby through your eyes. You went off, and I would kind of think, boyhood hero kind of stuff. Yourself, I think, and Anthony Foley for me would have been huge men in my life, and privileged to share dressing rooms with you in the past, and it's great to have you on now for a rugby chat.
I'm kind of laughing at it. For you to say you're honoured, I'm obviously blushing because that sounds slightly ludicrous. We kicked hard out of each other all those years ago. But yeah, it was funny. I was just thinking when I was looking at you, I haven't seen you for 20, 25 years or something like that. You had a full shock of black hair. You actually had a wave in your hair, if I remember rightly. It's hard to take you seriously now,
Woody, it was only a few years ago. I think but it was only 2 years ago I went bald. And it takes a while to reveal the beanie and get out like this. So it's only from men like you back in the day, trailblazers. Thank you for that as well. Another thing that you can add to your cap. Woody, we want to chat to you particularly about you being captain of Ireland, captain of your country, and for our audience to kind of get a window in through your perspective and what that might have been like. You were capped, you had 6 caps to your country, and you were asked to be captain of Ireland. You were 24 years of age. Can you tell us how that came about, how you were approached, and what that might have felt like?
It was kind of strange, and I was pack leader, I think, in my second or third cap, which at that stage was, the guy to look after the forwards. Our coach at the time, Jerry Murphy, had said, we might as well give you the opportunity to talk because you're never going to stop anyway. And that was part of it, because sometimes your team is quiet and doesn't have the confidence to speak under pressure. I used to be very shy, and actually I was repeating first year in college, and I got the chance to work in Bobby Burns' bar in Limerick when I was 17 or 18 years of age. And I remember it just changed. I had the facade of Keith the barman. I was able to kind of pretend to be somebody else, and suddenly I built up this courage and confidence to be able to actually hold a conversation and to, I think, feel a little bit more confident in myself. And that then translated to rugby started going well for me. The two of them seemed to go hand in hand. Yeah. I was pretty fit at the time. I had energy, and you need energy to be captain as well. And, I still got a bit of a shock. I'd been out injured for a year and a half after the World Cup in '95, after Jonah Lomo's World Cup, I suppose, is the one to remember. And I got injured at playing against Japan in Bloemfontein. I was out for 15 months. I had to kind of grow up a lot at that stage. I think in many respects, and we'd always you've talked about respect and you talk about the 10-14 rugby, but the idea of having new friends because you're doing well in rugby and then they're gone the week after you're injured, you have to grow up very, very quickly. And I went at that stage, I wasn't part of Ireland's plans. I asked them and they said, you're not part of the plans. So I left and joined Harlequins in London because I wanted to play, and the game had just gone professional, and I wanted to see what that was like and to see what the opportunity was. I was just 24, going to London, thought I'd hate it and loved it immediately. Yeah. I mean, 2 or 3 weeks in, I thought this is an amazing place to be. And I started playing well for Quins. And I remember being at a training session. I wasn't picked for the first match in the autumn. I was picked for the A team, and I captained the A team. We beat South Africa A, and I played well, and the team played well. It was one of those kind of mad games. And I was in the University of Limerick, and one of the Ireland coaches or managers at the time, as I was stretching on the field, gave me a kick into the kidneys.
Nice.
And said, by the way, you're captain of this shower. And then went to the team, don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but Woody's your captain. And I remember thinking, what a kind of slightly alternative way of doing it. And it was...
You were told. You weren't asked. You were told.
Kicked in the kidneys and told. And, it was at a time of huge change in world rugby at the time, from the Hacker conversations that had happened prior to the World Cup in '95 to a huge exodus of Irish players overseas, to the fact that the IRFU didn't want to embrace professionalism and took a year out to try and figure out what they were going to do. I think they probably made a lot of mistakes, and they made some extraordinary decisions, and they made some extraordinarily good decisions, which has led to today where we have a system that's still in control of the IRFU, which is very, very important. But it was a very odd time, and we had different coaches all the time. And I was one of the few guys who would speak and was confident enough that, I've read Legacy, and I know I've read through all the different parts that you have in terms of the All Blacks. I know an awful lot of the All Blacks, and we have a different system, and it's a different structure where it's changing all the time to try to get to that, I think, higher plane of excellence that I think we're beginning to see more of, not ironically, but under the stewardship of Joe Schmidt, the New Zealander. But at that stage, we just wanted to try and do as well as we possibly could, and we weren't geared up for it at all, and we weren't geared up for that heightened sense of excellence that is so apparent and has been apparent forever in New Zealand.
You were saying, Keith, that you were shy, and then kind of came out of your shell through working in the bar game and stuff like that, and obviously you're a talent at rugby. You're getting more and more respect. You go over to London. You're playing with legends and Harlequins. I remember that time you had Caban, Zinzan, Thierry Lacroix, like Jason Leonard and Will, like rock stars of world rugby. So your confidence must be rising, but you still got 6 caps and you're captain in your country. Are you doubting anything in that? How does that feel like when you're... That's huge pressure, I'm sure, is it?
It was. Do you know what? I think playing for your country is huge pressure, but it's the pressure you want.
Yeah.
Sometimes pressure, it's hard when you... I think it's hard when you talk to some internationals over other ones. I thought there was a huge responsibility, and that is a big pressure. But I loved it.
Yeah.
I lived for it. I relished it until I retired playing rugby. I thought it was a huge honour and opportunity, and I wanted to do as well as I possibly could. I made loads of mistakes. I mean, so many mistakes, but that's part and parcel of it.
Yeah.
And you only can do what you can do with the information you have at your disposal at that particular time. And at that stage, we were kind of all over the place. So there was no consistency of selection. There was no consistency of selection of coach. So our coach changed every year.
Yeah.
We had the big five, the 5 selectors who would pick the team. It wasn't one coach who would pick them. So there was no doubt politics involved in lots of elements of those. But it was incredibly exciting. And I was playing with some great friends that were older than I was, and I mean, do you know what? I was confident in my ability. I was confident in my ability to exhort better performances out of other players, criticise other players, even if I wasn't on top form myself. I would always try and include myself in the criticisms, and you try and have a couple of caveats so it's more palatable when you're younger. Afterwards, you just forget about those and just say, you have to do your job. And I changed. It changed over all the years I was captain. I tried to do things differently. I learned. I had the benefit of playing like that team that you mentioned in Quins. We'd 9 international captains in that first that I played, which is kind of tough. I became captain of the club the following year, which was, in retrospect, I think a huge mistake to try and be captain of your club and captain of your team at the same time. I just don't think I ever took my foot off the emotional pedal, and I felt myself under too much pressure with that. And at the end of that year, I said, you know what, I won't do that again. And I captained the club from time to time whenever needs must, but I didn't stay as captain of the club after that. It was I don't know that it affected me for good or ill. I enjoyed it. I didn't mind whether I was captain or not. And one of the things I'd be really, really strong on is you're either captain or you're not. And if you're captain, you do the captain's job. And if you're not the captain, you follow whoever the captain is and you do whatever it is to make their job easier and better.
Yeah.
Keith, I know you're a big fan of history. The weight of history and the captains down the years. So when I was growing up, Willie John McBride, Fergus Slattery, Fitzgerald, these are all names that were spoken to me sort of at night when my dad was telling me rugby stories. Were you aware of the history of the captains for Ireland, like legends of the game?
I was hugely aware of history. My dad played for Ireland and played for the Lions. I grew up in a house that had rugby all over the place. Now, he died when I was 10 years of age, so he never saw me play rugby, which is a bit sad. But and actually, when I mentioned my father on that, Keith Quinn he's involved in broadcasting.
Yep.
He thinks I'm named after him. There's a very interesting. He was a ball boy to Dad on the 1959 Lions tour to New Zealand.
He was in the Wellington Test.
Absolutely. You might do me a favour and you might see if you can get me a contact detail for him. And I know that kind of fits into the middle of something else, but these are all kind of personal. I'd love to get in contact with him, which is kind of an interesting story. So that's history and the history of rugby. Of course, we had rugby books all over the place. Subsequently, I've got a huge amount of information on Dad and on all the rugby back in those years. I have them now, which is very nice to have. But the idea of captaincy, no, not so much. I didn't think about it in that fashion. And I have to honestly say, I never thought for a second I'd be captain of Ireland. It was never my dream. I didn't think I'd even play for Ireland. We played together opposite each other in schools from sort of early 80s to mid 90s. I gave up rugby in the middle of my time in school. I was a scrum half, out half, 12 and 13. I gave it up because I was too small. Yeah. I was hitching into Limerick to hitchhiking into school. It was bloody awful in the evening time, trying to come back in the winter. And we don't get bad winters, but it was still... And I just didn't enjoy it. And I didn't enjoy it for about 3 or 4 years. And then suddenly, my last year in school, I fell in love with the game again. And I moved into the front row. So I had some kicking skills and not some decent throwing skills at different stages in it. And so that's part of the background to it. But I never thought I'd play for Ireland. So that wasn't my big dream. It wasn't a huge thing to actually have or say or do. I just started to like to play again. I love playing.
When did that penny start to drop, Keith, that you were going, actually, I'm pretty good at this?
It dropped when I went to Garryowen. I was fortunate. It's funny, Will Greenwood of England centre fame was having a conversation recently. I'm meeting him again in a couple of weeks, but he was talking about the people who had influenced him during his life, be it coaches, be it parents, be it whoever it was. And he said once he started writing down the names, the amount of people was colossal. And actually, when you start thinking about who was an influence, who wasn't an influence, I was incredibly fortunate that my first coach when I went to Garryowen was a guy who was a Grand Slam winner. Ireland only at that stage ever had one Grand Slam winning team in 1948. And I had Paddy Reid, who was the centre at that stage, who had played in 48, played in all the matches, won the Grand Slam, went and played rugby league the following year, got injured after about 6 weeks, and got a 40-year ban from rugby union. And he wasn't allowed to be fully back in rugby union again until 1989, which was when I joined Garryowen. And he was my first coach. Now, in fairness to him, he coached under an assumed name for a lot of the interim period of time. But at that stage, that was officially allowed to be back. And he was a tough man. He had a great way about him. He had a great sense of... if I give you a little story about him...
Please do, yeah.
18 years of age, playing Galwegians in Galway. We were coming back. We stopped off on Clarence Bridge. I had no money. And Paddy said... And Paddy wouldn't have had a huge amount of money either. And he said, there's 20 quid, Woody. You should have that, because you should always buy a pint for somebody else. Buy a pint for yourself, but you need to buy one for somebody else too. And I said, I'll give it back to you next week. And he said, don't. But, you know, you have to give that 20 quid to somebody else some other time. Really cool. A lovely, simple thing, simple idea. But, and I interviewed him for the BBC the year that Ireland won the Grand Slam in 2009, which was the first one again, 61 years later. He could still fit in his blazer from 1948.
Nice.
It was extraordinary. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was extraordinary. And he gave me that sense of, well, you have to express yourself. So I was a hooker who wanted to run, who wanted to chase kicks, who wanted to kick the ball, who wanted to handle the ball in the back line, who wanted to play as much with the ball in his hands as he possibly could. So, and I was given free rein from that with Paddy Reid. And within a year I was playing senior rugby. Within 2 years I was sitting on the bench for Ireland. You know, it kind of went, not a simple curve, it just kind of went crazy. And I'm involved in the Ireland squad.
That great Gary Owen team, I remember coming up against you guys, and you had pretty much guys that are huge in the game. Well, Philip Danaher would have been captain of Ireland around that time, I guess, when you were playing with it, or just finished. But you had John Mitchell, who's now former All Black coach, and from this part, we're in the Waikato region, and Buck Anderson, who was also another Waikato man. Two huge personalities and influences, like particularly in club rugby in that time. And I believe, reading around that time, Buck Anderson would have had a fair all influence on you. Would he?
Yeah, my first number 8 was John Mitchell. And when I was working in the pub, John would come in for a soup and a sandwich every day. I remember I just got to know him very well. He was a tough guy. So my first ever game of senior rugby, he was my number 8.
Nice.
Which was kind of cool.
Wow.
But Buck, Brent called to me here in Killaloo during the summer, which is great. We're still in contact. Sent him an email last week. He was extraordinary. He was a horrible man. 18 and a half, 19 stone, 6'4", kind of hefty, bald guy. When I had hair at that stage. He treated me with nothing but disrespect, and he broke me to build me back. He was awesome. He was the biggest influence of a player at that age. All you want to do is have someone who cared enough to treat you badly, almost. Yeah. He forced me to get better. He words I never knew, which pill for the ball, which that Kiwi thing that you say. He used to just get the ball. If I didn't throw it, I didn't hit him where he wanted it to hit him. It hit him in the palm of his hand, not the tops of his fingers. He'd catch it, kick it down the field, fetch the pill, and I hate. And I hated him for it, and I loved him for it. And it's funny because I had a chat with him, because he was there with us for a year. He was in his 30s. I was 18 or 19. I didn't socialise with him. I didn't know him. I didn't talk to him. I never got the chance to kind of say how much of an influence he was to me and on me. Not properly until we met in my garden last summer, and it was just great to see him. Yeah. I actually, and having not seen him in that period of time, it's 27 years or whatever it is. I couldn't get over the affection I had for him, because I know what I know what he meant for me and to me, which is pretty cool. But he was so driven. He had an excellent attitude. I mean, it wasn't. I'd love to say it was lovely. It wasn't lovely to me. It was really hard on me. But yeah, I think he knocked off the lazy edges off me.
Fantastic. So there's I mentioned Philip Danaher. You would have captained under him maybe, but you're a young captain for Ireland at 24. What would you say your style was? Or you're a year later, you're with the Quins boys with a whole host of captaincies. Can you tell us a bit about some of the stuff that you were picking off others' captains, or who would have influenced you there, and what your style of captaincy was?
Well, I think an awful lot of my elements that would have come from Ireland were, we weren't professional in attitude. Like, forget about professional being financial. That's kind of irrelevant to this conversation. It's to the attitude that you want to do to achieve. We weren't there. And actually, New Zealand were really there at the time. nobody else really was. I think South Africa was, but they weren't in the game at that early stage. They were back out. We didn't really know where we were going, so we knew we weren't fit enough. We wanted to get fitter. We knew we weren't organised enough. It's very hard to fully trust a coach who's gone again within a few months, and then the next one is gone again within a few months. And these aren't excuses, by the way. We weren't up to scratch at the time. So in light of that, I would have seen Philip Danaher and Michael Bradley and different players like that who were involved. We ended up trying to build ourselves to a level of controlled aggression, so that by the time we got out on the field, we got to the pitch of the game very, very quickly. We had to use that aggression to overcome maybe our lack of skills at certain points, or our lack of technical nous, or whatever it was. And we were very honest, with what we had at that stage. And that changed over a period of time. I then had the great, I was trying to find my way. I made so many mistakes at the start, and I got an awful lot wrong trying to do too much myself, because I was constant for a while, and selection was changing all the time. There weren't a huge number of constants, and I actually took too much on myself. And I've said that before. I mean, the mistakes I've made were they were constant, because you're trying to learn on the hoof very, very quickly. And we didn't have a huge number of support structures around it at that stage. So I went on the Lions tour in '97, and so that was the end of my first season as captain of Ireland, and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
There was still that level of aggression and passion that I would have brought to it, but I was seeing that in Lawrence Denario. He had the same level. It was almost identical. The backs thought we were insane because they wanted to calm down entirely. And
you had a lot of leaders there. Woody, like Gregor Townsend had captained Scotland, didn't he? Ian Evans had captained Wales. Martin Johnson, of course. Delalio himself.
Absolutely. They'd all captained. Jono, I don't think, had captained England at that stage. He wasn't the most vocal, but I've never seen a guy control a room with his presence alone as a captain as Martin Johnson did. He was so far the standout captain. We all deferred to him. Was never talked about.
Yeah.
But you'd kind of nod to say, "Can I say a few words?" Now, you never had to ask the question. You just nod, and he'd nod back. And as I say, he's not the most vocal. And but we all touched on different parts that were maybe appropriate on that Lions tour. I learned an awful lot from it. I'd love to say I toned everything down then afterwards. I didn't, because certain things were appropriate as it went along. And it was only when I changed quite a lot when we got a lot of the young bucks into the team. And once we had young guys that were coming in, like Raj and Stringer and O'Driscoll, John Hayes, Simon Easterby. They were all younger guys that suddenly came into the team. They'd won at underage things. They'd won a lot of schools things. They were fitter than we were. They'd been professional far longer in their life. It didn't require the same level, and it still required the focus. And sometimes you'd do a lot of that to try and make certain the focus was there. But it was exciting, changing, because you're able to see different things and how different people responded.
That's wonderful. That's a hugely exciting time in rugby, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that Lions tour of '97, the Irish lads on that had such a huge impact on that. Like, everyone had such a great, there was a massive world champion South African side. You go down there, you win a test series, something the All Blacks had struggled for years and years and years to do, and you guys go down and win that. That must have taken confidence back to the Irish camp, because you certainly see the performances, the historical performance, start to pick up after that. Could you touch on that at all, Keith? Like the stuff you learnt there?
I think it changed our mindset. We were unfortunate in some respects in that Paul Wallace got injured soon afterwards, Jeremy Davidson the same. And what those two guys did on that Lions tour was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. Eric Miller. Eric was beyond brilliant, and he was 21 years of age on that Lions tour. He did extraordinarily well, and it just didn't quite get to that same level for him afterwards, and that happens as well, and that's which I find quite frustrating because he was a talent, and we got an awful lot of really good things out of him, but I actually thought there was more. I thought he was amazing, and I think at times coaches didn't get him, and he was and you'll all know it, guys are different. Not everybody goes in the exact same box that you'd want everybody to go, and he had a very interesting talent that actually I don't think some of our coaches fully appreciated actually. But we brought things back. We had a few rugby league guys that were with us. And I remember the element I would talk about most from that 97 tour was we put in a proper defensive structure, which we never really had in Ireland. And what it was entirely built upon, I mean, McGeechan and Jim Telfer were brilliant for different reasons. McGeechan got the Lions, understood the Lions, was able to impart how special it was to bring that sense of oneness that you're looking for a team. And when you've got four countries coming together who are kicking the crap out of each other last week and are now holding each other up in a scrum this week, you need to have that sense of oneness. And it's very difficult. Lions is a very difficult concept. And McGeechan got it.
Yeah.
So, all those guys would follow McGeechan anywhere because he got it. It was pretty amazing. But we had a chunk of rugby league guys that were in there. We had Alan Tate. We had Scotty Gibbs, guys who had a different style of defending that we weren't really used to in rugby union. And for them imparting onto us, I found it fantastic because you didn't run around as much. We were kind of hear 'em, scare 'em defence for the last 10, 15, 20 minutes of games. We were running out of puff and people were saying, is it fitness? It could have been fitness, but actually we were incredibly inefficient in Ireland at that stage. Suddenly we had a system that you said, this is a system. Nobody's covering for anybody else. If somebody misses a tackle, that's his fault and the opposition will score a try. But you're not to waste your energy trying to cover everybody, because if you do, you're leaving holes everywhere. And I remember that striking me as being something quite interesting at that time. And we missed 3 or 4 tackles in the defensive line during the first 2 tests, and they scored 3 or 4 tries. It was as simple as that. But we didn't. It wasn't for a lack of trust. It was for good play or a bad tackle, good or bad play, whatever it was. But we were still flying it at the end of each of the first 2 tests. Our energy was there. I learned an awful lot from that. It took a while for us to bring a lot of that back into the Irish system, but we did bring it back in eventually.
Yeah. That tour, of course, immortalised on that DVD, which is just an incredible documentary. You with your bald head, that tour over in Quins, captain of Ireland, you must have went to a level of celebrity very quickly, and you must have been instantly recognisable outside your normal lifestyle. What was that like? How did that sit with you? And then World Player of the Year as well. What does that do to an ego?
Well, I coming back from the Lions in '97, I actually found it incredibly difficult because if you go back to what I said at the start, I would still consider myself to have been a fairly shy person. I found it fine. I found it nice. I found it intrusive. I found it a bit relentless.
Yeah.
But I was living in the UK and it was fine because it wasn't that over there. And people would recognise you but give you a distance. And I lost my head for a period of time. I became like every young kid does, and I did for about 6 or 9 months, which was it was annoying me really more than anything else. I just wanted to be left alone, but I was going out to places where there's loads of rugby fans. You're not going to be left alone. And eventually I just said, you're being a prat. It's time to wind your neck in, and it'll be fine. I mean, you know what? I didn't mind it, and once I got used to the idea of it, rugby fans, they love rugby.
Yeah.
they're nice. The people are incredibly nice, actually. And so I would have said that from then on-ish and to the rest of my career, it was kind of part of what it was. It wasn't an important thing for me, and I wasn't running away from it. I wasn't jumping all over it or embracing it. I didn't need it, but it became the sort of new norm.
Yeah.
And I still find it I found it unusual. A guy from Killaloo, it's rural Ireland. It's unusual,
Yeah.
and still is. I mean, I've 3 sons now. We have we're laughing about it, and as to how some of those things kind of happen. I don't know. It's just part and parcel of what it is.
Yeah.
It's no different than it is in New Zealand. Actually, New Zealand is infinitely worse because it is the be-all and end-all in New Zealand. And I know, having spoken to Fitzy and Zinzan and different guys that are there at times, not living at home is a bit of a relief, and yet they miss it really, and they want to go back home. And but it's funny because it's part of your life, but it isn't. Rugby isn't all your life.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a difficult transition where you're only considered because that's what you are, because that's what you are to them and to the supporter. But I would say people are incredibly nice for the most part.
Lovely.
Yeah. I guess the other bit that I really wanted to touch on in that era of Irish rugby, sort of late after 97 through, and then you had the great 2001 Lions tour, but sort of the emergence of Brian O'Driscoll and those other young players that you mentioned, and O'Driscoll goes across to Paris and scores that hat-trick, and then all of a sudden, I think you guys looked as though if he's playing and you guys can gel, you can beat anyone. Was that a huge turning point in sort of the history of Irish rugby, that sort of small couple of years?
I think it is, and I think it's actually fair to put a lot of that on Brian. I think he should get a chunk of the credit, because I remember the first day he turned up at training. He was a kind of slightly spotty kid with a pair of glasses that were like the bottoms of Coke bottles. He was blind as a bat. And I always reckoned he was such a great runner because he couldn't see who was beside him. He didn't want to pass it. But I didn't know why he was there. I didn't think he was a player. I didn't know anything about him. I was in the UK. I thought he was there with helping out the bagman. And he turned up and went onto the training field. And after about 5 minutes, it was, oh, Jesus, yeah, I know. And he had, and I would have put one of my standards was I wasn't the strongest guy in the gym. I wasn't the best guy on the track or in the fitness work, even though I tried hard and all those sort of things. But I would have wanted to have set a standard to be as good as I could be on the training field. And I didn't always get there, but you have to set the standard that that's what you want to do. And I thought I was there a fair bit at the time. And I was until Drico came along. And he had a different standard. And he was a guy who all he'd ever known was professionalism. And I do think there is a period of time in rugby's history where the guys who'd played amateur rugby were all gone. You're then looking at a whole new breed of different kids who've come through the system, who have trained better, have eaten better, have been coached better. Their acceleration is so much more than ours. They have a higher skill set that's been brought further along in Ireland anyway. Drico was at the leading edge of that, and I thought he was amazing, and he was a star immediately. I was lying on the floor when he scored that third try in Paris, and I remember thinking, we won that game by a point. Yeah. He scored a hat-trick. 2 years previously, they'd said there was a good chance we'd have lost by 100 points in France. That's the sort of turnaround. We lost by a point 2 years previously in Paris, or 2 points. Now we win by a point. He scored a hat-trick. If he hadn't scored those 3 tries, he still would have been the best player on the field that day. He was amazing that day. Though when you're looking back now, you only see the 3 tries, but he was amazing. And I remember thinking that anything was possible. Because when you have a player like him on the field, now you want more of them, of course, and you want structures and you want everything else. But for me, that was the sense of hope of success was coming in.
it was for Irish fans, you know, you're his teammate. For us as well, I think that was our feeling. Like, we're eternally optimistic people as sports fans anyway. But then we have this guy on the field. Eddie O'Sullivan, we were chatting with it last week. He mentioned when he was selecting Draco as his captain that there's certain criteria, and you mentioned that you found that you were often a solo voice in the dressing room, and you thought going forward this needs to change. Would you have had, you know, input with Eddie at that time in recommending Brian O'Driscoll, because O'Driscoll had never captained his country at that time, and the changes that were to happen? Would you have?
What actually happened, and I remember it very distinctly, was Eddie and I were sitting in the team room or in a private room, and we were saying, I had a load of injuries, you know, so I've had a lot of surgery in my shoulders. I was trying to get back, but you're kind of fitting in games, waiting for the next bloody surgery, and we'd already started building up different names. You know, I had 2 stints as captain. Then my second stint, I surrounded myself with different guys. You know, you wanted them to be in the key positions, the spine of the team. They weren't originally. And then you were just looking for who were the right fits from it afterwards. And Eddie and I sat down, had a conversation. We said, on the count of 3, let's name who should be the captain after me. 1, 2, Brian O'Driscoll. And we both said the same name at the same time. And I said, I'd like to go down and tell him. And Eddie said, why? I said, because we've always had this, either there's a rivalry thing or you don't know if you're captain, and then, you know, because you weren't necessarily captain all the time, you were just captain for the test. So let's try and see if we can formalise it. Let's try and see if we can have proper succession planning, have an idea that he'll be captain in 2 or 3 years' time. When I hang up my boots, let's bring him into some of the team meetings. Let's bring him involved in different things, let him get a see of it. And so I went down and said, Brian, what would you like? Would you like to be Irish captain? And he was 22, I'd say, at the time. And he said, yeah, I do. I want to be captain. He told me subsequently, I walked out of the room and he said, what the hell have I said? You know, what have I done? You know, and
nicer than the kick in the kidneys, isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a great. He was the obvious choice. There were other guys. Anthony Foley was there, and he was brought in as a vice captain. David Humphreys was brought in as a vice captain. I remember in around that period of time, so that he wasn't going to be dumped into the middle of something and not have the support structure around him. And because the mistakes, you know, there's no point making the same mistake twice. You have to learn from them. And so that was kind of part and parcel of what it was. Brian subsequently said he thought it was unusual that I would do it and not the coach. And I'd asked to do it because I wanted to see that this would be something that wouldn't be seen to be behind the captain's back. Yeah. I just didn't want there to be anything destabilising in it. And I thought it was kind of a nice thing to do. I know the All Blacks have a different route where when a guy is made captain, they have a dinner with all the previous captains. I don't know if that still goes, but I know that that's part and parcel of what it is, which is a lovely passing on of the mantle and also of the information and the stresses and the pressures that go with it. And you have an opportunity to kind of delve into the history of captains so that you can go and bring some of that to your own level of captaincy, which I think is a great idea and would like to see more of. But it is interesting because different guys do things in different ways, and Brian had a very different way of captaining than I had, and he should have, because he had different experiences than I had.
And you mentioned that they had the vice captains came in, and that's sort of formalising a structure that I guess is probably still there today in Irish rugby, where the structure would have got more concrete and people know sort of ahead of time they'd fit into that structure, and then they're on a pathway to being captain. I guess it's probably changed that way, and you might have been at the forefront of setting up that structure there.
Yeah, there was bits around there. I mean, we had before that Warren Gatland had come in as coach, and what he did initially was essential for the Irish rugby team. He said, "This is my team, and we're going to stick with the team." So we'll make changes, but we're not going to go for wholesale changes all the time. And there's not going to be, there's no politics in this. This is the team. We only have 22 players or whatever it is. We're going to try and keep it in that. He organised a proper game plan that suited the skills that we had at that stage. And we suddenly went from being a little bit unprofessional. I don't mean it in that bad way, but we weren't as organised or as efficient as we should have been, to suddenly becoming incredibly difficult to beat. Now, that's not the same as becoming a winning team, but it was one of the steps under which we did it. The next step then, I thought, was with Eddie O'Sullivan, and suddenly there's a change to a more attacking style of play. But a lot of that came from the fact that we had the players with which we could build an attacking game plan. And so that became very important. So all those progressions happened. I find it interesting now, A, in retrospect, but B, looking from the outside, how coaches do different things, how each coach has his own way and his idea of how he wants to do something differently, of how he wants to structure different elements. It isn't about playing favourites. It's about using the skills that you have at your disposal to get the best out of the team. And all the coaches have done that in a different fashion.
That's a fascinating insight, isn't it?
I like the way that you went from going difficult to beat was the first step in that progression to where Ireland are now, challenging for the Grands. They're still on for a Grand Slam and won a Grand Slam a few years ago, and Triple Crown started coming around as well. That's a really, really interesting point for me, looking in at the Six Nations as we see it at the moment.
In the Six Nations, Keith, I thought it was very interesting what Eddie O'Sullivan was talking about, how intense that period of time is, and it's all about preparation for a coach. But once you get in there, it's an incredibly intense tunnel. Is it the same for a captain? I presume it's different captaining your country through the Six Nations than it is November Test Series or those June internationals?
Yeah, I love the big tournaments. So I love the idea of a World Cup. I love the idea of a Lions Tour. I love the idea of a Six Nations. I do like the autumn internationals. I do like the summer tours because you get an opportunity to play against teams you don't play that often. And when I played, we played far less number of games than they do now. Yeah. So it was a great opportunity to play against great players. And it's one of the things you kind of forget about. I was a fan. So I wouldn't say that I was intimidated by any of the guys I was playing against, but I wanted to play against them. Yeah. I wanted to be on the field with them. I wanted to experience what it was like. I wanted to beat them too, mind you, but I wanted to see what that was like. So I liked some of those touring matches that used to go on because I thought they were pretty important. The Six Nations at Five Nations when I started, that's a historical tournament. It's a very, very old, long-standing, and I know some of the style of it gets criticised at times in the Southern Hemisphere. I think you're missing something in that criticism. I think there's a history there. There is an intensity there, but there is a level of association from rival fans that's just extraordinary. It is squeezed into the shoulder part of a tourism season. It fits perfectly within a sporting calendar. It isn't just about the game. It is also about the city that it's in. It's about the fact that you don't have a home and away. It's not exactly fair. Any year it's not fair. Yeah. There's always something. You can criticise plenty about it, but it's the stuff that it's magic. Yeah. And elements of it it's just extraordinary. So it is getting the opportunity to look like we've just seen in the last week, a full Murrayfield for Scotland to play England, for England to somehow miss the pitch of the intensity that is required, and for Scotland to do an absolute hatchet job on them and fully deserve their win. That those things are thrown up, which just throws up the whole competition, and everybody can beat everybody else, which isn't necessarily the case, if we're to be honest, in the Southern Hemisphere. And it has just made it to be, I don't know, I love it. I love I've retired from the BBC last year, so I'm going to the games now back as a fan. Nice. With my family where I can, or with my boys. and loving that fact that you can go in and just, and just love it. So somebody asked me going into the ground, into the Aviva the other day, are you nervous? I said, I'm not playing. I'm not really, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm not really nervous. But I was nervous for the last 10 or 15 minutes. You kind of forget, you forget it and then get up to it very, very quickly. But, and I'm liking that now. I'm retired 15 years. I'm liking the fact of being able to go back into it, not working, because I have worked pretty much in 5 or 6 nations or rugby since 1992. So it's kind of nice to suddenly say, I'm actually able just to go to it and enjoy it, not have to do anything, go to a bit of hospitality, meet up with friends. It's pretty cool.
Do you miss that magic, Keith? I'm sure you miss from being, I think every player just misses the game when they retire from playing, but you were also the first pro captain, professional, was your job. First professional captain of Ireland. And retiring as a captain with all the duties that goes with, and a player, like, how was that for you? How did you just jump out of the game completely when you retired?
I retired in the World Cup in 2003. I was 31. I wanted to play for 2 more weeks. We got knocked out of the quarter final. I wanted to get to the final. I wanted to win the bloody final. We didn't do it. I didn't tell my wife I was going to retire. And I will admit to the fact that I admitted it to RTE television before I actually ever got near. I went back to the team room in our hotel afterwards, and we were just having a bit of a chat, and there was a couple of little speeches going, and I said, look, I think it's a great bunch of guys. I think that's going very well. My time is finished now, but that's good. And Marcus Horn said to my wife, who was standing beside him, he said, is he retiring? She said, how would I know? And I had a thought that I would retire. I had a bad shoulder that was really bad. It was bad for my whole career. So I've had 12 shoulder operations. So it needed, my surgeon had kind of given me the go ahead to say, look, you're going to have to stop, but it's worth it for a World Cup. And I said, yeah, it is. It's worth it for a World Cup. But I was, the day after I retired, I woke up happy that I'd retired. And I won't say I didn't miss it, but I knew I'd made the right decision. Yeah. And, people say, what do you miss or what? I mean, I loved every bit of it. I wish we'd won more, and I wish a lot of other things, but I did love it. Yeah. But I was glad to stop, and I wanted to step away from it because I don't have the patience to be a coach. I don't mind coaching kids from time to time, and if someone asks me to go in and have a look at something, I will. But I'm not a coach, and I know that. I'm too impatient to be a coach, and but I know that was a part of my life. And you said it was the first time it was a job. It wasn't a job. Yeah. I did never see it as a job. It was, I had a good job in the bank when the game went professional. I worked all the way through my career, even though I was a professional rugby player, because I liked it, and it kept my brain some way fresh for so that I wasn't, I didn't think rugby every minute of every day. Yeah. And I don't know that I'd have been able to do that. And I think in many respects, I was the halfway house.
This has been incredible.
That's great. Keith, we just finish up usually with a 10-14 question, and for us 10-14 represents 2 kids, a number 10 and number 14, and their first steps into sport before it ever gets competitive. It's usually about friendship and fun, and that's why kids stay with it. What were your first steps into sport, and who were they with?
Sport was everything in our house. By the way, we're a total sport billies. It continues still to this day. We used to have I don't know if you remember this, but we used to have the Aga Khan Cup in the RDS, which was an equestrian jumping event. We used to play rugby when rugby was on the television. We'd play rugby in the garden. We'd play hurling if there was hurling on it. When the Aga Khan trophy was on in the RDS, we jump fences in the garden. Yeah. So whatever was on the telly, we played. That was bloody part and parcel of what it was to be it. I loved all sport. I'm in favour of, now that I've kids, I'm trying to impart what it is and you can't live through them, they make their own decisions of what they want to do. I tell them they have to play a team sport and they have to play an individual sport, because I think there are huge things that you're going to learn from both sides, from having to do something entirely on your own and having to do something entirely within a team. But for me, 10-14 means an awful lot more. 10-14 is, in 2014, the village where I live, in 2014, we had the 1,000-year anniversary of the death of Brian Boru, who was the last High King of Ireland. His keep was 50 yards up the road from me here on the hill in Killaloe. His keep was called King Cora. And so we have history all over at this place, which is kind of amazing. So when I looked at 10-14, I presumed that actually that's the reason why you'd use those numbers.
It can be that as well. It can be that as well.
Yeah.
Keith, and there's a lovely synergy as well around what you did in rugby and what your dad did. You both played with the same 4 clubs, which is lovely. Garryowen, Munster, Ireland and the British Lions, and of course you played with Harlequins as well. Are your boys going to take that road, do you think?
Do you know what? They love playing.
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch it. My eldest is in the Junior Cup final next week for Munchins.
Oh, brilliant!
As a left-footed out half.
One of my worst rugby memories. St Munchins beat us in I went to Crescent, 1987 Junior Cup final. You guys had an incredible team. Huge men. Seamus Liston and a few lads.
Can I tell you, that was my year as well.
Yeah.
I gave up the year before. I never played Junior Cup at all.
Oh, didn't you?
So my eldest has already passed me out in that respect. And you wouldn't believe, like, it's gone so big, and Junior Cup, Senior Cup in Munster are huge competitions, and it's great. They love playing. So they play rugby and they play soccer, they play golf, which is nice, and I had Sid Miller, who was the other prop with Dad in 1959. Yeah. I introduced the 3 boys to him, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, and Sid was, I think he was still chairman of World Rugby or IRB at the time. And I said, Sid Miller, this is Alexander, Gordon and Tom. And he said, your father was a lion, your grandfather was a lion. No pressure, boys.
Oh, nice. My dad tells me a funny little story. You're born a few weeks ahead of me. And I think we were in, when we were little babies, in the nursing home in Limerick. And your dad used to pop in and out. Or my dad was a prop with Old Crescent and over in London Irish, and he would have known your dad. And my dad always said to me, there was 2 little boys in the ward that day. He said, when I was drop in and out, and one of you went on to become a great rugby player. So that wasn't me. So Kate,
we're looking very similar now at this stage. I had a chat with your dad 3 weeks ago, and his first senior game was propping against my dad.
Oh,
which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And he was trying to be the big hard man, and I think my old man softened his cough a little. So
put him in his pocket.
So we'd a lovely chat. There was an unveiling of a bronze bust of Anthony Foley in the Shannon Clubhouse a few weeks ago. So I hadn't seen your dad for a while, so it was great to see him.
Lovely. Well, Keith, as a rugby fan, I just want to say thanks for coming on to the 10-14 and having a great chat with us. But I watched your career with great pride, and you certainly represented everybody from your region and your province and your club, anybody who supported you very well, and we were all very proud watching you. Thanks very much for what you've given the sport, and thanks very much for this chat. Yeah,
thank you very, very much, Keith. This has been incredible. A huge fan from down here.
It's a huge pleasure. It's nice. I haven't fully got my head into what you have. I'm going to have a little look at the app. We're going to see how things go, and I'd love to come on again at any stage whenever you want.
Brilliant, Keith.
Thank you very, very much.